Hello, everybody. Welcome to an awesome stream. I am super excited because we're going to be doing one of my favorite things ever, which is an AMA. And I am joined by four of our absolute glorious content creators within the Ashes of Creation community, many of whom you have probably seen before if you are regulars in the community watching all things that are Ashes of Creation content. And let's just do some introductions because I'm excited to get into this. Obviously, we have, as I said, our four glorious content creators. Vladis, welcome, Vladis.
Oh my God. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much, Stephen. It's a pleasure.
I love your hat, by the way.
Thank you.
It
Thank
is-
you.
yes, I love it. And that's merch, actually. Don't you sell that?
Yes. Yes,
that
I
is
do.
that is
Definitely
super cool.
inspired by early Intrepid for sure.
We got some weird looks when we had that in Seattle one year, let me tell you. But it was a great conversation starter. Uh,
Absolutely.
and then we also have our glorious Jamie Chaos. Jamie Chaos, how's it going, buddy?
Not bad. I'm actually really happy to be doing this on your end instead of being
I
surprised that it's happening on my end. So I'm super pumped to be here and doing it this way.
You mean you're not crashing the live stream like I
No.
did you one time? That was a lot of fun actually. For those of you guys who don't know, I was watching one Sunday Jamie Chaos's stream, and they were talking about an interesting subject, and I just jumped in. I was like, you know what, I want to join. Let me come on the show. And it was an impromptu, and I got to say, you handled it really well. Like
Thanks. I ended up cutting like 10 minutes of footage on the YouTube version of that. So no one saw me fumbling trying to get you on.
well, that's you got to do what you got to do sometimes. And then we also have one of my favorites from Loreforge, Sunny. How you doing, buddy?
Hello. I'm just so excited to be here. This is gonna be a riot. I've got the other two guys under my desk. They're yelling questions at me, so it's just me on the camera, but they're here in spirit.
I gotta tell you guys at Loreforged, it is definitely a highlight of mine when you guys come out with some lore videos. One, because obviously, you're giving these lore videos as you're peeking through the keyhole, so to speak. And it's always so interesting to kind of hear the takes that you guys put in. And one other thing is like the quality is just so good for what you guys are doing. And I share it throughout the office. Our narrative team, our lore team, they watch it, they love it anytime there's a new video. So kudos to you guys. You do a great job with that.
Well, thank you so much. I think that those guys are not ever going to forget that you just said that. But we've been doing it for a long time and just gradually got better gear. So if you would have seen us 10 years ago, we might not have been having this conversation.
Well, you guys do a great job.
Thank
And
you
then
very much.
last but of course not least, we have Nice Gaming. Nice, how you doing, buddy?
Good. How are you? Really, really happy to be here.
Nice, I got to tell you, your name is so appropriate because always, whenever I'm watching your either recaps or your theory crafting videos, you are just generally always freaking nice. You have this huge smile. It's an inviting presence, and it's a positive thing that I think is a great testament to the content creation of this community. You do such a great job on that.
Really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know that you guys have been getting together some questions from the community. Some of you guys had little interactions with the communities to kind of vote for questions, I think, along the way. And you guys obviously have your own questions, and I'm excited to chat about them. Obviously, I love a conversation. I'm also a pincushion for questions too, so I don't mind that. But wherever you guys want to take this, wherever you want to start, I am open to chat.
All right. Well, I would love to talk aliens with you, Stephen.
Oh
Seriously.
my gosh,
But
can we talk
just-
aliens?
Oh my God, I would love to talk
Yes,
aliens.
let's talk aliens.
Just to give you away from Ashes, but again, this would be Ashes questions. But okay, to preface, guilds, the backbone of the entire Ashes community, right? Alliances and so forth. You were a
Yes.
guild leader in lineage. So
Yes.
guilds are a very important feature in Ashes of Creation. So my first question is, can you give some examples of guild tools that are going to be in Ashes of Creation from a player data
Sure.
perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I so little fun history. I started I started playing MMOs obviously when I was really young. 7 years old. I didn't have a guild then. That would probably have been concerning if I was in a guild as a 7-year-old, considering the content typically that exists within the guild atmosphere. But when I was 17 and started playing Lineage 2, my first guild that I ever joined was called Darkness. I was a little bit of an edgelord back then. So I was in a guild called Darkness, and then I started my guild, which I ran for a number of years. I think almost 14 or 15 years,
Oh,
and
wow.
we had thousands of members across the world, and we would have really cool guild meetings. We would meet up in person. We had like a really intense guild DKP system where I had like engineers custom author an auction website that people had account services on in the guild, and they would get like, DKP points and stuff. And I always hated having to kind of do that myself, right? I always wished that some of the tools that I wanted to use as a guild leader were not like native to the
Spreadsheets.
game system that I was involved in, especially if I was able to like slurp data from the game and inform decisions, whether it be participatory data, whether it be like kill counts for a war, or like just different things that I would use essentially to kind of gauge how are my members performing, right? And how can I leverage administrative tools to message them either offline, like an SMS text system, or the forum connectivity, or know what their kind of like play times might be if they want to share those with me, so that I can cater them to certain groups and constant parties and mix and match people. Like, those types of layers of like tools are what I'm trying to achieve with Ashes, and having
Wow.
it be native to the game. And obviously, everyone here at the studio are gamers themselves. They're playing MMOs, many of which I've either have led guilds or been officers in guilds. And so that resonates with them as well. And I know on our UI side, Grat, who's our lead UI engineer, and Colby, who's our lead UI UX designer, they are both very in tune with delivering on that promise, which is to give native tools, at least at a bare minimum, above and beyond what other MMOs we've experienced give, as an out of the box solution for guild leaders.
Can you give like a couple of examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of those is going to be able to kind of message guild members offline, either through integrating SMS text as an option if people want to subscribe to that feature, being connected to forums so that people have an opportunity to kind of message board within the guild windows of the game, and then they can see the kind of message of the day. They can see the forums through that window. Another thing that we want to do is provide data around player performance in events that the guild is participating in, or that guild wars might be participating in, giving knowledge about where they might have their properties located within the game, where they may have their freeholds located within the game, what members of families they might be participated in. Those types of informations is what I think is beneficial for us as guild leaders to kind of have insight to, and cater the experience of the member in the guild to what their playtime and activity is.
Right. All right, so I've got some system heavy questions. So this first one's going to be about the story arc system. We haven't really received much information on how it will accommodate players of varying levels or its level accessibility. Are the story arcs designed to engage players of all levels simultaneously, or certain segments specifically tailored for high-end or end-game content?
It kind of depends on the story arc. We have story arcs that do both. We have story arcs that are catered towards high-end high-end level ranges, that are very specific to the types of adventuring levels that we want players to participate in that story arc. And then we have some story arcs that have different sections which cater to a broader diversity of level ranges. And the way we kind of approach players participating in those more broader story arcs is that the activities of the lower level players feed up through the story arc. So what they're doing influences even what higher level players are able to do. And kind of meeting the certain quota of objectives that are necessary to progress the story arc requires participation down the line across the story arc features. So to answer your question, Shirley, we have both.
Okay.
It just kind of depends on the story arc.
All right, I guess I'll go next. With most dungeons and POIs being non-instanced, how large and intricate can we expect dungeons to be in order to accommodate many groups and PvX potential? For example, how many players do you expect the Tower of Carfin to accommodate?
That's a great question. So let me break that up into two sections. First, it's important to note that while the vast majority of our playable areas are within the open world, there are some that are contained obviously within instances. Those instances being either individual instances, party instances, or even in some certain cases, raid instances. With that being said, however, part of the dynamic that a PvX game wants to emphasize when it comes to open world dungeons and playable spaces is the natural friction that occurs when scarcity is a real thing. And scarcity means that not all hunting areas are going to be the same quality. They're going to be specific loot tables that are relevant to certain hunting areas. There's going to be certain spawn rates that is relative to experience values for those areas. And there's going to be different compositions of mobs that are relevant to the areas as well. And so because there are these kind of tiers of quality of hunting grounds, that creates a rarity value essentially to those locations, of which then there is a level of scarcity because there's limited space. So we are going to be creating spaces that are very large, to answer the first part of your questions, that will host many, many, many groups, right? And we're also going to have spaces that are relatively small and might only be able to cater to one or two groups. Second part of your question, as it relates to Carfin. Carfin is broken up as a hunting area into two primary sections. There is the tower itself, and then there is the wreckage of the city in which Carfin existed beneath. Now, the beneath section is the wreckage itself is generally catering towards groups of 3 to 5 players, right? So it's not so much a solo area, but it is an area where you might go with a few friends. But if you went with a full party, then maybe your kill rate needs to be really high, and there's a few sections that are in the wreckage area that could support that, but not the entire wreckage, right?
Okay.
So that's an important distinction to keep in mind. When thinking about the dungeon itself, the tower is intended for full parties. And there are, I believe, 6 levels. There are 5 levels above the base level. So 6 total levels that are playable. And each of those levels will support anywhere from 3 to 4 groups, essentially. So it is a relatively large structure, a vertical dungeon that we're expecting groups to spend a lot of time in.
Awesome.
And it's not intended that the groups go between levels, right? It's intended kind of like they find a level and they carve out a section of that level that they're going to be hunting in.
Nice.
And then another group's going to be near them, and maybe there's going to be some friction because they keep pulling mob from your section, and you're like, hey, what the hell, dude, get the hell out of my section. And they're like, no, you're going to die now. Like, I don't know. Something might happen there.
All right.
Very cool. Well, it looks like I'm going to go now. I am from Loreforged, so you know that I'm going to try to cram in a few lore-based questions.
Oh, here we go.
Here we go. All right. So by the time the portals reopen, the Tulnar have been down there for an awfully long time. So Are they thriving or are they just surviving? How much civilization are the Tulnar building underground?
That is a great question. So one thing I want to talk a little bit about with regards to the Tulnar culture is that they are not a super centralized nation. They're not a super centralized like civilization, right? They are relatively tribe-like, city-state-like, even at some of the higher points when it comes to their factions, right? And having spent a significant amount of time in an indiscriminate amount of time at this stage, you may learn more about that as you get into Vera, but having spent an amount of time in the Underrealms, Those factions sometimes can be at odds with each other, right? And not all Tulnar are going to be friendly to the other divine races or even to each other because of that. So there's still some rivalry between those groups. Now, when we talk about what is the apex of like civilization that some of those tribes have accomplished, some of them have accomplished some pretty significant construction and development in the underrealm. So much so where you have a metropolis-sized location in the underrealm for the Tulnar. So that's not something that's going to be present obviously at the start of Alpha 2, but it is an intended location where you can see really the Tulnar civilization and their culture.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I guess I'm up next. So, can you explain the philosophy on why there is a singular option for tank main players or healer main players at the archetype selection screen? And how much customization will there be in the base kit and augment system to truly make these different play styles?
Well, let me make sure I understand the first part of the question. So you're saying, why is there a single option for healer and tank?
Yes.
I see.
And can we get the tank name changed?
Please.
I think we did a poll on that in the community at some point a few years ago, didn't we? And I don't know how that poll turned out. Somebody should dig that up if you're watching in the audience. See if you can find that poll somewhere in the Ashes Reddit. I'd be curious to see what the sentiment was there. But to answer your question, let's start with the second half of that question. When it comes to diversity, I think that you're going to have a wide range of diversity that's afforded through the secondary archetype system. That is intended to really flirt with the line of what a main role tank or main role healer is, and provide some more hybridized gameplay for those particular roles. That comes in a number of different forms. We've talked a little bit about, obviously in the past, how augments are intended to work with primary active abilities. And it is because the tank role and the cleric role are only afforded two of the archetypes that some of the most interesting, in my opinion, options of hybridization are going to come from those secondary choices with the tank and the healer. So you're going to get a broad diversity of gameplay options there. When it comes to the role specifically, and why we're servicing those two roles with just two base archetypes, those are really critical, unique roles on a per party basis, right? When we talk about party comp, generally it is a traditional wheel of MMORPG game design that when talking about the trinity of gameplay roles, that you expect to have one tank and one primary healer in a party design, right? And we wanted to stay true to that, obviously. And those roles do have a significant impact on general gameplay loop when we're talking about moment-to-moment combat, right? Between the tank controlling the battlefield, being able to take hate off of other players, being able to maintain, aggro status with the predominant threat source. That is a role that we don't necessarily want to build in another archetype to kind of compete with. The cleric itself, however, is also integral. Now, that's not to say that we do not have some influences. The fighter has the ability to kind of off tank, especially depending on, and the reason I say that is because when we're talking about just from a base stat perspective, like con for a fighter is going to be high generally at a base value. Their ability to kind of absorb hits is going to be greater because of their suite of ability selections that they have available to them. So there are some other roles that do touch the line a bit in that divide of DPS to tank role. And on the healer side, the bard has some regenerative abilities that they can utilize. Now, when they choose then to spec as a secondary class option into cleric or tank, if you're a fighter or a bard, you're going to get much closer to those roles, right? And I think having an off tank is an interesting, gameplay option and necessary for certain encounter designs that we want to preserve space for. So the focus is really to kind of, stay true to what we expect from an MMO perspective with regards to those roles and group composition. We feel that the current class design achieves that, and we're going to allow players to flirt with what hybridization looks like for those roles through our secondary archetype options.
And just to clarify,
Yeah,
because the fear for me that a lot of people have told me is they're afraid from 1 to 25 that you're just going to get one style of gameplay. Like for the cleric, you're just going to be a holy priest from WoW. So as in the base kit, is there going to be any way to play differently from 1 to 25?
Yeah, and I think that what we're trying to achieve in the base kit offering for those two roles, and you may have seen this already with the cleric, class live streams that we've done. There are some offensive options there, right? And you could spec more offensively as a cleric than you would necessarily into the support. The same is true on the tank side. Your ability to kind of, customize your build options. You're not pigeonholed into specifically that role. You have hybrid options just from a base kit perspective.
Piggybacking on the tank name thing, if we go Guardian, you can go Guardian, Juggernaut, and who doesn't want to be a Juggernaut?
A Juggernaut. I can't remember what we were saying, but when Combat was working on the fighter, how often I heard in the playtesting somebody say, "I'm the Juggernaut, bitch." It's just like, oh my god, straight out of
that's the
X-Men.
exact thought I had. All right, so from our understanding, the land management system in Ashes leads to environmental consequences due to over-harvesting. With the elimination of the enemy of the state feature, what mechanisms are available for node citizens to manage or counteract situations where a group of non-combatants intentionally depletes resources from an enemy node, given the significant downsides associated with becoming corrupt?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are options, right? You have, if those individuals are part of a guild, you have guild war as an option, right? If they are part of another node as a citizen, you have node war, which is an option. The idea is, how do we allow moments of player friction to circulate through the game's systems? And what you're describing is a moment of player friction where the resources local to your node or your guild, location are being capitalized upon by people you don't know or don't want, and they're doing it in an aggressive manner to harm your ability to then interact with that environment after they leave. That is a reputation score. They are establishing a reputation score with you as another non-faction based player. And the way that reputation score circulates through our game system, such as leveraging the potential for your guild now to be at hostility with them, right, is something we want to allow players to leverage. So there are answers in the guild war system, in the node war system, to respond to aggressive actions like land management abuse. However, let's say the people doing the work are, alts, and they are not in a guild and they choose to be citizenless, right? The other thing that we want to keep in mind is that there are ways to improve land management scores. There are policies that you can take which improve that and counteract that. So, it is not just a zero-sum proposition between somebody's griefing me and not. This now may direct the way that you choose to govern your node in response to those outside actors, right? This is, again, intended to engage the systems. So while you may not want to accrue the corruption debt dealing with these, these alts or whatever, right? You now may need to manage your node differently in order to compensate, right? Unless it is meaningful enough to you to PK those people and you go and do that. That's also an option.
So on the management side, would there ever be a potential policy that allows you to kind of make an area, like say a forest, a purple area, or is that something that's not being considered?
It's something we have definitely spoken about in the past. There's advocates for it on the design team that are more bloodthirsty designers. However, generally I have guarded against that, at least as it stands for now. If we're talking like, Ashes of Creation, first expansion, number 2 or whatever, and we want to introduce perhaps some of the mechanics of like, policies that do what you just described, like designate a zone as open PvP, or if we wanted to reintroduce the person non grata, approach as well. Like that, I think, is still in line with the PVX philosophy of the game. So I wouldn't rule it out at some point far in the future. But generally, I think we have a lot of bloodthirst in the game currently through the events that we have, through the flagging system that we have, through the open seas flagging provisions that we've made. Like there is a heavy emphasis of PvP in the game, as it rightfully should have, because we are a PVX game, and our conceptually design philosophy is you build the world through PvE, you change it through PvP, right? Like those are the competing factors. I think where it stands now is sufficient.
Thank you.
All right. What stat or utility benefits will active block and active dodge give players, and what resource or cooldown are associated with them?
So the resource is going to be stamina. We are currently implementing, for the purposes of Alpha 2, a universal stamina system that all archetypes share. When it comes to active block, sprint, and dodge, those will be a part of a universal skill progression tree that players can choose to invest skill points into. And those skill points will share with their archetype active ability and passive ability skill points as well. So if they're going to divest themselves of further progress within their archetype in lieu of investing in the universal skill tree, they will have access to benefits that those universal skill tree progressions provide. And some of those benefits do include stat bonuses when utilizing those universal skills. Some of them include different types of effects that can only be granted the player through the universal skill tree as well, such as the ability to potentially parry an attack, or something along those lines. We'll be talking about the universal skill tree somewhere probably mid-summerish timeframe or late summerish timeframe, because it's still actively being developed. But the idea is to have that be an additional knob of customization that influences the way your character plays.
And just as a small follow-up, do you plan on any archetypes specializing in those core combat skills better than others? Like, will the tank have things in their tree to be even better at it?
Because it's a universal progression tree, the intent is to provide interactions with all the archetypes. So Perfect. It's not going to be, specifically more beneficial for one archetype over the other. The intent is that each of the archetypes will have some synergy, interaction, benefit to their general kit identity through the universal skill tree, and that's a viable option for you.
Lovely. Thank you.
Okay, so during the Alpha 2 Fighter Archetype preview, we at Loreforged loved the chanting of the Mukma Goblin Shaman as they were channeling their spells. So the question that came up for us was, can we infer from this that there is a possibility of discoverable dialects in Ashes of Creation?
So first, I just want to say that audio team did a great job, obviously, with those incantations that the goblins were citing. And one of the things that still sticks with me, and probably with many of you there in their community and you guys here, is the games we've played, the MMOs we've played, we can probably recall the most often said thing by an NPC or when we cast. and even I'll be playing D&D, like tabletop D&D, and I'm going to roll my dice and I'll incant the spell chanting from the prophet in Lineage 2, I'll be like, empowering desire, champagne, I'll throw the dice out. So, I think that it's obviously very important that we have not just the audio component of that incantation, but memorable ones that we will hear often and associate when we hear, either the good times we've had in that game or the bad times or whatever, right? So to answer your question, are there dialects? Right now, I will be honest with you, the incantations are relatively ad-libbed, right? They're not being sourced currently from a comprehensive dialect library of like the languages that each of the cultures have. Long term, I would love to continue to flesh out the identity of our cultures through going down that path. But it's just not something we've prioritized currently as a result of, needing to develop the game. But I will say that Win has done a phenomenal job already in authoring some great influences and themes for the sound types that even our minor factions have, so that the audio team can reference them when authoring the sound effects for those creatures. And so that is something that, while it's not fully fleshed out, we do have references that Win has compiled for the major cultures and some of the minor cultures so far.
Very cool. Well, I'm sure Tolkien's grandkids are just kicking around somewhere. You could give them a call and see what they're up to. So
By the way, I apologize. This for those of you out there, you've never seen me probably at my workstation. I'm actively on the development floor currently, and it's only because I joined this call 2 minutes before we went live, because it's been a very busy morning. But, but other than that, you do get to see now the development floor. This is the design section, so I am in the design area.
Okay, so this, Stephen, might be a very easy question to answer, and I hope it's a yes. Will there be any kind of a trial quest to test out all of the secondary archetypes before making a final decision when selecting your secondary archetype at level 25? A lot of players are fearing that you get to level 25 and you just have to choose one, and you're not going to be able to try like the other 7 to see what would vibe with you.
Got it. Well, first, I will say that we do intend to allow players to switch between secondary archetypes. We've talked about that in the past. So even if you do make a choice there, that is something that you can change. It won't be permanent. Your primary archetype, you cannot change. Your secondary archetype, you can. With that being said, we do not currently have designs that are intended to provide a preview period for players. Maybe that's just more of an old school kind of thing. I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea of that, right? Giving players, preview, but it's not planned for at the moment. You just kind of, you make your selection, you go and you do the quest, and that's your secondary archetype, and then there's a quest that you can take in order to change it around. So that's the current design intent.
Is the intent for changing it going to still be a long process?
Yeah, the intent is that there is some level of investment when you want to choose to change that class identity. Yes.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
And just to be clear, I just want to comment on why that is. Some people may say, well, that feels cumbersome, right? Like, let me play how I want to play, which to a degree I agree with. However, there is something to be said about making a choice, and that choice having consequences. Consequences not always bad, positive, but it lends to establishing an identity and a reputation, right? Many times in older games that I've played, older MMOs, I will see a person's name and I will know that they are one of the server's best tanks, right? And I don't have to guess what build they're on that day, right? It's most likely they're a tank. They are a tank. Like they can't change that, right? That provides a different sense of community when you're on a server than just everyone can be anything at any time, right? And so, I want to try to replicate that by having the choices be more meaningful, and provide that identity.
Sounds great.
So Annie and I plan to have the Chaos and Lace Cartel, but we'll probably be like a smaller guild. So this one's focused around that.
Nice.
Smaller guilds can opt to enhance their passive skills as a strategic choice over increasing membership size. Could you elaborate on the passive skills available to smaller guilds and how they enable them to remain competitive against larger guilds in various gameplay scenarios?
Yeah, and to be honest, like that is a delicate line to play with. Because what happens when you make those passive abilities too strong, then you create the meta of how guild structures should be on this game. And so it means that, if it's a zero-sum choice between I either take the passives or I'm bad, it's like everyone's going to take the passive. So there has to be some complement between, why guilds want to have expansion options versus passives. And so passives will be delegated to certain groups within the guild. And the core groups will have stronger passive access. So when you first form a guild and you're level 0, you may have 30 guild slots available to you, right? And that's your core guild group. And you can move people in and out of that group because when you get expansion slots, they form separate groups in the guild structure. That might be a knight or a squadron group, right? Whatever you're going to want to call it, because you customize it based on the guild. And then those groups will have access to certain types of passives. Some of the passive types will be horizontal, some will be vertical, and it will be dependent on where you as a guild member are placed within those groups. And the placement within those groups are determined by the guild administrators, right? And so guilds will then spend currency as well as skill points to invest in those passives for those particular groups. And so what we want to do is we want to maintain the strongest passives for the central groups and allow it to decrease in power going outward from there. So even guilds that select to go expansionist still have some passive abilities that they can spec into. But the guilds that choose to stay smaller, they can concert their skill points towards the more central groups, leveling up those passives to higher strengths. And those passive types are things like waterfall stat augments, crit rate, regen values, and then they can get a little bit more intricate with the types of effects that they have, like negating an attack, ability, a spell attack against you as a target every 30 seconds or something. It depends on kind of what we're talking about with the abilities. They are wide ranging, but the intent is for them to be impactful.
All right, cool. I think I might actually got more people asking more questions than that it may have answered.
I think we all want to follow up.
All right. What is the intended time to kill in both 1v1 or group PvP scenarios? Will players in solo or outnumbered PvP scenarios have ways to defeat larger groups or punish them for stacking too close to each other?
Hey, that's 2 questions. Is that 2 questions?
Who's counting at this point?
Okay, wait. Okay, so what was the first question? The first question is, what is the intended TTK for 1v1s?
Yeah, or any PvP scenario, whether it's 1v1 or you can answer it separately, 1v1 or group PvP.
Okay, so right now, if I were to say average TTK between average leveled characters and same level characters and average gear score, I would say that we're probably talking anywhere from 10 to 15 seconds, upwards of 30 seconds, depending on the archetype, right?
Okay.
So, obviously the more restorative archetypes, like a cleric or whatever, might be able to last longer, or a tank might be able to last longer. If they're facing another tank or if they're facing another cleric, right, then it's going to be like a, wiffle bat fest or something. And then if you're talking about, 2 DPSs against each other, that's going to be real fast.
Yeah.
So I would say that's generally the intent. Now, what does that mean when talking about like group play? That means that if you are really organized in the way that you have targeting and target assists, and that you call, raid calling, like there is opportunities there to have multiple DPSs take out a target real quick, right? And because of that type of precision gameplay, it really raises the skill ceiling when talking about organization and how players play with each other, right? Because now the room for error is smaller. And that is something that I think is important in any competitive style of game, which a PVX game is relatively competitive. So that's why we tend to go on the smaller TTK side. And then now, what was your second question?
So as far as like fighting outnumbered, like would players in a smaller group have a chance to fight a larger group? Like, are there going to be AoEs that do more damage based on how many people are within this proximity? Ways to combat larger groups and not just let sheer numbers like determine the victory?
Well, okay, that's so somewhat connected, right? Because if we're talking about smaller TTK numbers, then the room for error being less, that means that you can have a scenario where a larger group, and by definition a Zerg, which is less organized, less skilled players, but are numbers over skill, there is now a better opportunity for the smaller group to prevail against the larger group if they are better organized and more skillful, which tends to be the case in smaller groups, right? So intrinsically, those two philosophies are tied to one another, right? The shorter TTK and the how do you solve the Zerg problem? Well, by definition, the Zerg problem gets solved through skill.
All right.
Okay, so I made Cash and JB let me ask an econ question. So here it comes. If everything that I have read is true, stating that auction houses, markets, player stalls are all exclusively economic node buildings, then what does trade look like in the other three node types?
I see. Okay, so first we have to vet the supposition. Not all nodes are absent of markets. All nodes by default have a market building. Auction houses, as you described, are present within the economic nodes. So that is a true distinction. However, the market buildings do provide player stalls. So those are also not delegated just to economic nodes. Within the vicinity of the market, and depending on the upgrades you choose and the level of your node, you will have additional stalls that are available. So players can utilize those in non-economic nodes. In addition, you can also use player shops, which require certificates in order to use. But once you have a certificate, you can then place your player shop within the vicinity of a node's market, any node's market. So basically what that means is you will take that certificate and your character will sit down in place, and they will spawn a UI billboard above them where you get to make a brief advertisement of what your shop is. And any player can come up to you and they can interact with your character and see your shop that you have listed goods for and make purchases as if you were a vendor from your shop. So that's the difference between player stalls and the player shop system. The benefit that economic nodes markets have over non-economic node markets is that their player shop certificates, when sold from a Metropolis economic node, I believe, can be placed anywhere in the world, independent of market proximity. So you could be at a dungeon and set up your player shop there, and it's like, hey, you want to buy some health pots? You grab your health pots, and you could, set up there. So yeah.
Very cool. Thank you. That actually answers quite a bit.
Okay, sorry, my mind just got blown. So sorry. Okay. This is actually a question from my community. It's actually a pretty straightforward question. what do node types look like in this current iteration of the build? And will all node types be available to test at the start of Alpha 2?
No, not all node types will be available to test at the start of Alpha 2. I can say that definitively.
Okay.
Currently, the state of nodes is scientific, is our academic or scientific, what people will call nodes, and that is an election method, right? That is the voting method. We have not yet stood up the other node types, and it is likely that at the entrance of Alpha 2, we will be only using the election method for node mayorship. Again, Alpha 2, however, is intended to have additional updates as we continue through Alpha 2, right? And those will be relatively frequent. And as we test things that are currently getting developed and implemented, we will put them into Alpha 2 for players to test. In short order, a lot of that will be node type stuff, right? Because that's on our critical path of priority when it comes to development, is standing up the node services and the node mechanisms. But for currently testing what we need to test with regards to player government, the interaction of the player government with the build systems, the policies, everything that goes into managing a node, we're servicing that through the academic scientific node type.
And just to, I guess, follow up a little bit. So
Yeah.
does that mean that other nodes that are like military, because again, they're all hard coded, right? So
True.
are those offline? Like in at the
No,
start
it
of
means
Alpha 2?
that currently they are designated as scientific or academic.
Oh, they'll all be scientific. Okay.
Correct. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't be testing certain features before implementing the additional node types that relate to a militaristic node or a divine node, such as through our narrative systems. We will likely be testing and reflecting different cultural aspects of the node type through commissions that are available, through the different narrative types that are available that will be military, divine, and economic. But when it comes to the government systems, that will be scientific to start.
Gotcha.
All right. So we've learned that the raid difficulty adapts dynamically based off of player performance and group composition, and that the dynamic adaptation raises questions about the implementation of the adapted scaling during raids, especially where there's PvP involved. Could you explain if there are mechanisms, particularly during boss fights, that protect players from PvP interactions, such as room locks, or are all raids intended to remain fully open to PvP?
Yeah. So as I said, when we were talking about the dungeons earlier, it's nice that some dungeons do have instancing. Some boss rooms are instanced. In those locations, yes, they will be serviced either through a room lock or some other mechanism that, protects the engagement, the environment of that encounter to who is intended to be there. But the majority of our encounters can be interrupted, right? They are open world. And in those events where you have two groups that are coming together that might be at war with one another, where open flagging is not necessary, they are just flagged combatants with one another, they're going to have to manage the battlefield between what they're achieving in the PvE encounter, right, versus now what they're experiencing in the dynamic player versus player encounter. And some of the effects that we have, which allow the victors of those engagements to continue forward with the PvE experience, is thing like are things like stat dampening through the death debuff. And the death debuff, when activated multiple times for the losing party, will continue to stack, and it will gain time until eventually their ability to interrupt you is now essentially decimated through these stacks of debuffs that they've received through continually losing the fight. And that's kind of how we intend to service. Okay, let's let a person prevail.
I just follow up real quick. So is the dynamic adaptation only in those instance ones, or is that meant to also be in the open world PvP?
You're talking about the dynamic AI?
Yeah.
Yeah, the encounter. So the encounter design is dynamic regardless of if it's instanced or not.
Okay.
And the reason for that dynamicism, first of all, there's a couple of approaches to the dynamicism there. One is how does the the state tree of the NPC respond to the actions of the players? Well, it weights certain actions and behaviors based off of what the players are doing. And as it weights those things, it makes decisions that will be unique according to the encounter that's occurring in front of it. So each time might be different as a result of that. That's one section. In addition, when we talk about the adaptive scaling, this isn't scaling in like power relation to the level of the player. This is scaling in the quantity of participants, right? And that means that it starts to weight the behaviors that include AoE actions higher than others as a result of the number of players who are present. This intrinsically increases the challenge rating of the encounter because those AoE abilities are providing a higher return on DPS overall to the raid encounter for the monster.
Cool. Thanks.
I'm gonna piggyback off of Jamie's amazing question and kind of stick with dungeons to a certain extent. Risk versus reward seems to be involved in all systems. Do you feel risk such as death penalties or the threat of being PK'd during dungeon content will lead to players zerging world bosses and dungeons to minimize said risk, thus trivializing some content and experiences regardless of that planned difficulty scaling you just spoke about?
Well, I think another part of our design that is more old school, but speaks exactly to this thought, is that the reward is finite. And what that means is in a lot of modern MMOs, each person gets their own reward for participating. And back in the day, the one person was the loot master. They would interact with the raid boss, and then there would be some guild driven system or alliance driven system that would determine who's next on the list to get this bow, or who's the crafter that deserves this master legendary recipe, or where does this, legendary material go, right? It's not that, oh, everybody got your loot box because we all completed the boss together. Everyone gets the auto granted reward from the quest of completing the boss together, right? What people came for that reward, the reason why alliances and guilds organized the raid to go defeat the dragon was because the dragon bow dropped and there was only one that dropped, right? So the more people you take, the more slices of the finite pie you have to deliver, which reduces the reward structure. So if you're going to reduce risk, you must reduce reward.
Dude, that's so good.
Love that. I love that.
That's so good.
Well, that sounds like fun. Just end the podcast right there, I think.
The mic drop moment.
I know, right? Okay, so we're gonna switch gears here just a little bit. We all know that the freeholds will be difficult to attain, but one of the alternative ways that we've heard of is to experience the freeholds is the guild freehold. Is there anything that you can tell us about the guild freehold system?
Yes, I can tell you some things about the guild freehold system. So one thing that we've been discussing on the design side, some things that I've been thinking about with regards to what differentiates a guild freehold from a freehold, right? A guild freehold is not just a finite piece of space like the player freeholds are that everybody gets to share in. There are going to be likely expandable plots that are available around the guild freehold where members of the guild can have access to themselves that are administered by the guild master or whoever he designates to administer it. He or she designates to administer it. Where players can lay down an additional small plot of land to do farming on, to potentially do livestock raising, or to make other freehold endeavors. So the guild hall is central to those additional plots around it, of which will be finite that the guild will determine who gets.
Very cool. One quick follow-up on this. If you have a guild hall, can you still have a tavern?
If you have a guild hall, yes, you can still have a tavern. Those are separate systems. So the tavern system is administered by the node. And the node essentially gives out these business permits that are limited in supply that tavern owners then can use to customize the vendor tables with things that they create for players to interact with within the tavern hall and other types of services.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Stephen, just to preface, you've been teasing Rogue for over a year. And so this next question is about the Rogue. So will we see anything regarding the Rogue prior to Alpha 2? And more specifically, how will the Rogue stealth mechanic work, like in comparison to camouflage, or has that really been solidified? Can you tell us anything new about the Rogue?
So rogues do have true stealth, which means that unlike camouflage, where proximity matters in identifying the target, true stealth is not proximity dependent. So that is something that differentiates, obviously, camouflage from the rogue stealth ability. I can give some unfortunate news that the rogue will likely not be available at the start of Alpha 2. I know. We are choosing instead, this is a recent decision, to focus more on expanding the existing archetypes, fleshed out active abilities and passive abilities, and we will be saving the rogue for the first update after the initial launch of Alpha 2. So it's just not going to quite make it for launch, but it is something that we will very quickly be standing up as it is a key part of the archetype testing and Alpha 2. But yes, that's the plan.
Quick follow-up then. Can you give us the list of the Alpha 2 classes?
Just a quick follow-up. Yes, so the classes for sure at this point are going to be tank, ranger, fighter, mage, bard, and did I say ranger?
Yep.
Yeah, you did.
Wait, hold on here.
So summoner.
So summoner and rogue will be missing at the launch of Alpha 2.
That's correct. Yes, and both of those will be the first update right after the launch of Alpha 2.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yep.
Well,
cleric. That's what I was missing. Cleric. Thank you.
There's no healers in Alpha 2.
No healers.
Oh my god.
There's a cleric too. Yes, thank you. I thought I named 5. I'm like, wait a minute, there's 6.
I want to shout out a community member. It was Sonic Explosion who brought this to my attention. So this has a bit of a longer preface, and then I'll move to the question. But Grandmaster crafting stations are vital resources located within specific node tiers with access limited to node citizens. This setup implies that crafters might be bound to the Grandmaster stations of their home node, potentially restricting their crafting capabilities to specific types. Could you provide insight on the flexibility of the crafting system, specifically whether or not crafters can utilize Grandmaster stations outside of their home node, or if they are confined to the stations within their own node?
So crafters can use stations at any node. That's important to note, right? The difficulty is transiting the materials you need to the node where the crafting station exists, because the materials must be present there at that node. But the crafter can go to any node and craft at a crafting station. The benefits of being a citizen at the node that has the crafting station are significantly reduced fees to the point nearly of nothing, and additional benefits and access to unique enhancements to the craft if you're a citizen, right? Like depending if there's a relic available that grants the unique enhancement or something along those lines. So to answer that question, Grandmaster crafters can go anywhere in the world and craft at a Grandmaster crafting station. Yeah.
All right, cool.
All right. What is the current full list of weapons planned, and could we have an update on how dual wielding will work, such as weapon options and relative weapon trees?
So, another twofer 2 for question.
I don't know what you're talking about, Stephen. I
Guys are
don't know what you're talking
cheaters.
about.
I'm
Just a
seeing
run-on
I'm
sentence.
seeing a trend here. Nice. I'm seeing a trend. Okay. So a list of our intended weapon groups at the launch of Alpha 2 are one-handed maces, one-handed swords, wands, spell books, longbow, short bow, two-handed swords, two-handed spears, and dual-wielded daggers.
Dual-wielded daggers. And so for the follow-up to that, with the dual-wielding portion, so are daggers, can we infer that daggers are the only dual-wield weapon?
And by
in
the way,
that sense?
just real quick, there may be other weapon types that are present as well, but these are the groups that will have their weapon skill tree fleshed out. So,
Okay.
and those other types of weapons that are present, like model form, will likely be categorized into one of these groups so that they have skill tree progression until they get updated with their actual skill tree progression.
Okay.
Okay, and so what was the second part of the question? I'm sorry.
How would dual wielding work? And so can we infer that are daggers going to be the only dual wielding weapon, or are you going to do a one-handed sword, one-handed
able to
mace?
do, yes, you'll be able to do one-handed maces, one-handed swords, 2 one-handed swords. There's a number of different mixes and matches. They will all use the same dual weapon progression tree. So that's an important distinction.
That's what I want to know.
However, the way we're servicing dual weapons is that they will occupy your main hand offhand, and you will have a specific recipe which includes the previously completed one-handed weapons that are intending to be dueled.
Lovely. And one thing I'm seeing a lot of people in chat ask about, will shields have their own weapon tree?
Shields will have shields will have a weapon tree as well. Oh no, wait, no. Do shields have weapon tree? No, shields do not have weapon tree because they're an offhand. I'm sorry. Shields do not have a weapon tree. They're an offhand. There will be passives within archetype trees that grant towards shield usage. So some archetypes will have passives that benefit that. In addition, there will be a universal skill progression. The universal skill progression tree will have shield progression within it for the block action. So there are 2 places where speccing in skill points will give you more beneficial use of shields.
Okay, I'm done with my 10 questions.
That's 5 times 2. Nice. You cheater. Okay, well, I think this is the last question here, and we're going to end it on a lore question. I was warned not to ask you lore questions, and we totally ignored that. So here we go. What is the average person on Vera's experience with the essence? Is everybody using the essence in the same way, or is this something that's more like a rare gift that us as journeyman heroes have some sort of innate ability to tap into?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So essence, the relationship of essence with the common folk, the NPCs that you see around you, is that certain people within this world have a greater ability to focus essence into stronger effects, aka magic, right? And generally among the player population, you are all stronger wielders of essence as a whole and capable of achieving great things with it. While everyone has some attunement with essence because each has a mortal coil amongst the divine races, not all of them excel in its use or study, right? And so those more commoner people that you might see in the NPCs and narrative and dialogue and whatnot, many of them are not going to be as adept with the use of essence. It doesn't mean that they couldn't be if they tried. It means that they are not adept at using it. But you'll also see certain characters that are NPC, non-player characters, that are above and beyond any player character's ability to use it, right? So the idea is that essence flows through this plane, it flows through this universe, and the divine races have a unique relationship with essence when it comes to wielding it, and oftentimes that's the interest of the darker forces in manipulating that relationship.
Very cool. Thank you for answering lore questions. That's cool.
Absolutely. Well, guys, I got to tell you, this was a great AMA. I really enjoyed it. This was a lot of fun, and I see the comments in the community, they enjoyed it as well. Like, people are saying best AMA ever. I thought it was, yeah, I thought it was great. I thought you guys did a great job. I think asking some questions that the community was really interested in, and both questions that, you know, got some depth in them for people who've been following the project for a while, and questions like our lore, which gives even newcomers some idea of the setting that they'll be venturing into. So let me thank you guys for joining. Vladis, Jamie, Chaos, Nice, Sunny, you all did a great job today. I love what you guys do for the community. Obviously, content creation is a very important part of the relationship between development and the community, right? You are sort of the bridge that services the divide between people who are watching 24/7 and people who just want to see an update, you know, short update. And I think you guys do great jobs in creating the content you create. And I know I speak for the community when I say thank you for that. Please, let me get each of you to kind of plug your places. Nice, we'll start with you.
Oh, thank you. Nice Gaming on Twitch and YouTube. We do Ashes of Creation live stream every Tuesday. The voices of Vera, myself, and Is There No One Else? Really appreciate this community. Thank you for letting us be a part of this. Really appreciate the opportunity, and I'll keep it short there.
Love it. Sunny?
Yes, thank you very much on behalf of JB and Cash for letting us share the stage with such excellent and admirable hobbits. Lore Forged is a podcast that talks about the game Ashes of Creation, but also the lore behind it. And you can find all of our stuff, Twitch, YouTube, and Discord links for our Discord community over at loreforged.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Vladis, how about you, buddy?
You can find me on Vladis Gaming on YouTube, Vladis Gaming on Twitch. I also do the 1v1 podcast, which hopefully our boy Steven Sharif will be on episode 100. So looking forward to that one. Yeah,
that's good.
Exciting stuff.
Oh my God!
I didn't mean to kill you.
Oh, yeah.
You're gonna kill me.
Nope.
Unbelievable. No. Oh, Margaret's so funny. Jamie.
They didn't hear me,
how
but
about
I
you,
said
buddy?
never invited again. Now you guys heard me.
Yeah, you can find me at Jamie Chaos on all the different social platforms and over on Twitch. I do a show on 8:30 p.m. Eastern with Annie Lace called Tangents Creation. Based off the name, we go off of lots of different tangents while we try to attempt to cover a lot of Ashes stuff, but it doesn't always go that way. You can also find any of the, we also make YouTube videos and stuff. So if you type in Tangents of Creation in YouTube, you'll find us there. I think it's at Tangents Creation. So you find us there. And yeah, this has been a ton of fun. Thank you guys so much for having us. It's been great.
Loved having each of you. And I just want to give a special shout out to the Ashes of Creation community team. Margaret, Rye, Cody, all of the mods. You guys do an awesome job in helping us to facilitate this. Obviously, I think you are the shining light of what excellence looks like in this industry from a community team. So amazing job. Well, with that being said, I really enjoyed it. Thank you guys for joining us, and thank you to the community for tuning in. And we will see you all next time. Bye.